You're listening to What is Black podcast, where we have conversations about issues important to raising healthy and thriving Black children and adolescents. I'm your host, Dr. Jacqueline Duget, a board-certified pediatrician and mom. So let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of What is Black podcast. I want to thank you all for listening. I also want to let you know that there are a few more episodes until the end of season 1. I'm planning some great content for season 2. But before I take my break, I will bring in you great guests like today's episode. We have today Kelly Glass. Kelly is a writer whose interests focus on the intersection of parenting, mental health, race, and diversity. She's also the author of a young racial literacy book, Looking at Privilege and Power. Her work can be found in the Washington Post, Oxygen.com, HelloGiggles, and more. And in today's episode, we discuss 2 of her recent essays, one exploring the vulnerability of Black mothering, and then also addressing Black mom anxiety. We'll get into more of the background for and the inspiration for these essays, and I think we have a great conversation. So let's get started. So welcome, Kelly, to the show.
Thank you, Jackie. Happy to be here.
So I became acquainted with Kelly on Twitter. I saw the piece about one of her articles in the Washington Post. Washington Post has a section on parenting perspectives, and the first article that I read was "Where Do Black Mothers Go to Cry?" And so that's how I became acquainted with Kelly. But before we get started in the conversation and talking about her work, I'd like to give Kelly an opportunity to introduce herself to you all.
Yeah, so you did a pretty good job of introducing me as a writer. I am I'm a journalist by education. I am a writer by trade. I am just recently sort of considering my writing a full-time business, but one of my major focuses is kind of having those conversations that I don't feel like are covered enough in mainstream publications.
And I totally agree with you, and I think that's what resonated with me when I read the article. And then I'd like later on to touch on your most recent article. But let's first focus on Where Do Black Mothers Go to Cry? So when I first saw the article on Twitter, I posted it on my Instagram feed, and I got a lot of reaction from individuals that really liked. Really liked the article because I think it definitely spoke to them. And I think the other piece too is that I think I had a conversation recently, talking about, the role of Black moms having to be almost, I feel like, superhuman, right? And that article spoke to me. So I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the article and what was your inspiration for writing the article?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way this particular essay came about, I'm in a few different moms groups on Facebook, very active in them. And one of them, the moms were discussing this idea of, not being able to cry, not having time to cry, or not having space to cry. And then someone started a discussion of, where do we go to cry? And so kind of in this very literal sense, people started answering, the bathroom or here or there. But really, metaphorically, where do Black mothers go to cry? Where are we allowed to be vulnerable? So this sort of inspired this personal essay that, as much as I felt, as I was writing, it was very personal to me, but I consider it our story because I know that a lot of the themes resonate. I know that a lot of us grew up, religious families. Our grandmothers were, important parts of our lives, and we had these experiences one way or another that kind of shaped the way we handled or failed to handle, for that matter, our emotions, specifically crying, and specifically for Black women when we are expected to be strong. So as much as the article was personal for me, I really felt like I was writing something that I hoped would come off as this is our story, and in the end, this is where we go to cry. This is where we need to go to cry. And I'm very big on talking about my experience with therapy. My first forays into personal essays were about my struggle with postpartum depression. So I've been very open about that since the beginning of my writing career, and it's a thing that sticks with me, and especially as I see more and more Black women be open about their mental health struggles, I just want them to know, solidarity, like we're in this together. So this was really our story.
And again, I think you did such a wonderful job in the essay, going back to kind of bringing it home to your experiences with your mom, with your grandmother. And I really found it interesting in the essay when you talk about when your grandmother passed away, that particular year was just very challenging for you, and you mentioned in the essay it was this year that I also learned that tears were a weapon, and I was wondering if you could speak to that time in your life and how that affected you.
So I guess the short story would be this was around the time that, and I talk about this a little bit in the essay, that I moved from the south side of Chicago. So if you picture the south side of Chicago culturally, to a small town in Illinois where I was often, if not always, the only Black person in the room, and this is in middle school. So I grew up a very specific way, and I was kind of put in this experience where I was for the first time learning about how race almost acts as a subculture, how being Black was different than being white. Just to be frank, this was my very first experience with that at that age. So that year I learned a lot about the dynamics of things. So as I grew up being taught to stop crying, I was put in an environment around people who had learned how to use their tears, if you will. And we see this now. We see that in conversations, we have a word for it now, white fragility, and we see that come up often when we try to have these kinds of conversations and they're uncomfortable. And they're usually used as a way to shut down the conversation because once a person starts crying, that's viewed as innocent and as a victim, right? What do? We shut things down because, we can't hurt this person who's perceived as a victim. So that was my first experience with that, and I didn't know it at the time. But when I was writing this essay, that came to me. This essay was really just a recollection of all of the times that I had these pivotal points in my life that changed the way that I viewed the act of crime.
And thank you for sharing, being willing to share that. Because I think again, what I sort of related to, and I think I had to think about it myself. Your experiences that you shared, that you moved from south side of Chicago to a suburb where you now had I guess you may have been one of only a few black people maybe in your school or in your neighborhood. So I kind of grew up the opposite. I grew up in Washington D.C. where it was all Black, and then I'm just trying to reminisce about. I think it's true. Like I never saw my mom cry. If she had to deal with anything, it was kind of like, you know what, I'm just going to keep it moving. And it wasn't until I became a mom, and I think you sort of share this as well in that, this intergenerational journey that you take us through the essay, that it's kind of like it's when you become a mom, right? And I think it's now that we kind of have to make a choice, right? We either continue to continue that that conditioning, right? That social conditioning, or we have to understand that maybe we need to do things differently. But sometimes it's hard, right? Because there are times like there are times with my kids, right? I have two Black sons. I'm a Black woman too, so I guess it's redundant to say I have two Black sons. But I think that's the case, right? There are times when I want to be so strong, if I'm talking to them about a serious situation, right? I'm like, I can't cry because I want to cry, right? Because I'm scared of a situation,
Right.
that we're talking about. But at the same time, it's kind of like, am I doing my kids a disservice by not crying and not showing my vulnerability? So I just found it so interesting to reflect upon it.
Yeah, I'm there with you. And then there's also, for me, I don't know if this resonates with you, but for me, there's this piece where I don't ever want to dishonor my elders or my ancestors in a way that says, hey, the way that you did this, the way that you taught me was wrong, because I know that it came from somewhere. I know that it was a symptom of something. It served a purpose. But at some point, you do have to say, okay, this is not the legacy I want to leave for I also have 2 Black sons. This is not the legacy I want to leave for them, and this is not healthy for me. So yeah, I'm totally there with you on that one.
And as I'm thinking about what you said, I'm wondering if I would have been any different with girls, right? I mean, I don't have them, and I'll never know what that experience is like. But I sometimes wonder, like, would I have acted differently with girls versus having Black boys? Because I feel like I know I grew up. I have a younger brother, and I know we were brought up differently. But I think I think I would be different, but I just don't know how it would be different, right? For me having girls, because since you have your mom, your grandmother. Unfortunately, I wasn't around my grandparents, so I had my mom and my dad. So I don't really have that intergenerational experience.
Right.
So how do you feel that experience, having your grandmother, having those multiple generations, and you even grew up with your grandmother? How did that influence your parenting?
Yeah, my mom, she had 3 girls, and we all lived under the same roof with my grandmother at the time. So we're house full of women, and I never, my memories in the house that we grew up in Chicago, I can't remember a single time where I physically saw either one of them cry or express a vulnerable emotion in front of us. I knew that it occurred, but I didn't see it in front of us, not even for my grandmother. And there were times that I wanted to cry. My grandmother had a stroke, and there were times where she didn't remember my name. So there were several times where I wanted to cry with her, if you will, or in front of her, and I never knew if that was okay. So I really think that experience kind of lended itself to me being this person who very, very extremely emotional. I can admit this now. Extremely emotional, naturally, extremely, but not sure where was the right place or if it was okay to express it. And my grandmother, she was very, very religious as well. So was my mother. So that played a part as well in that experience. If there was ever a problem, if there was ever something for them to cry over, the most that I saw was them pray about it. So I really think that shaped my idea that, okay, if I wanted to be strong like my grandmother, who I admired dearly, crying everywhere, anywhere, or just crying in general, is just not what you do.
Oh, totally. I mean, you mentioned the Facebook group. I think I would have definitely chimed in, because I'm just remembering. I think when my mom is an immigrant to the United States, and so her mom passed away in her home. So my mom is from Guyana originally, and my mom couldn't go back home. But even when I don't remember my mom crying when she heard that my grandma, or not in front of me, right? I didn't see her actually cry when she passed away, or when she heard she passed away. I know she did. She must have, right? Because my mom's very emotional.
Right.
Like, I think most moms. I don't know if most moms are, but I think I get it from her, that emotionality, but not necessarily the crying piece. And again, that what you're saying kind of resonated with me. It's like, well, you know what? It's like, she had to be that strong that she couldn't break down, right? And again, I think that was sort of a conditioning. That's what that had to be learned behavior. And even younger, it didn't really. It's like, this doesn't make sense, right? You see on TV. Mostly, at the time, the 70s, 80s, like, it's probably like white people, you're seeing characters like, these people are crying, and like, we're not crying.
And you don't see that on TV either. You don't see, you don't see Black women, especially as mothers, portrayed as, I mean, we've made some strides, sure, but you don't typically see Black mothers in these very, like, soft, nurturing types of roles unless they're taking care of, other people's children. So even the way we grew up watching Black moms on TV who were very, no nonsense, and, it's just the conditioning was coming from everywhere, really.
Because I was thinking, I mean, I think the first time I probably ever I can remember seeing a Black woman cry on television was a Good Times episode. And the mom, Esther Roll's character, I remember her, she was, and I don't even know if she even cried. Maybe she was just expressing that anger. I remember her saying, damn, damn, damn. And I don't know if that was, and I forget if that was in relationship to learning that her husband, James Evans, had died. But I think she was like she's the first character I vividly remember, Black character, crying on television.
Wow.
I was like, oh, and I'd have to go back and find, look at a whole bunch of other movies and television shows to see that, but I don't look for it. I don't, because I guess I don't expect it.
Right. I think that's the thing. I don't expect it, and now I'm going to have to go back and do some thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how, like you said, our lived experiences. In some ways, right, I feel like, television and media sometimes, stereotypes or overgeneralizes images. But in some ways, I feel like, well, maybe that's true, right? That's really something they sort of like captured if you really look at a lot of media. Like, well, why don't Black women cry? Or, so I think, so it's very interesting, very interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
But do you think now, having the experiences that you had and using the essay to sort of reflect on how your grandmother and mother dealt with life experiences, has that translated now to your parenting? Like, are you okay with your kids crying, especially now Black men, right? So now that's another layer. It's like, okay, we have Black boys, Black young men, and it's like, are we teaching them that it's okay to cry as well and be vulnerable?
For me, absolutely. And I think it starts with us as parents. It starts with mom and with dad being open about emotions and letting our Black boys know that emotions are okay. It is okay. It is normal to feel this way. What do we do now? It's normal to cry, because what I don't want is to raise a boy into a Black man who has bottled his emotions, and he continues a cycle with his own children and with his own wife, who he doesn't know how to express his emotions to, because he didn't get the opportunity to do that as a child. That's one of my fears as a mom. And so when things happen to my boys, and they huge age gap. One of them is about to be 4, and one of them just turned 15. So I let both of them know. I understand. I understand that you're hurt, and it's okay to cry. It's okay to cry. Let me know when you're ready to talk. Because what I don't want is for them to think that being a man equals lack of emotion. Being a man does not equal hiding how you feel. And to me, that kind of emotional intelligence is so important. It's so important in a partner. It's important in a husband. It's important in a father. And I think it's something that we have, we haven't gotten it right, as a culture necessarily, but we have a real opportunity to do that. And if we start being open, if as mothers, we start letting our kids know, our boys know it's okay to cry, doesn't make you any less of a man, whatever that means. And if we have fathers who are also saying, hey, I cried when I fell off my bike. I cried when this happened to me. It's okay. If we have that, we can start moving away from these toxic ideals that I really think are oppressing us emotionally. So it's very important to me that my sons know. My sons have seen me cry, and they know. And I've seen them cry, and I've told them when they cry, and I've told them, hey, I understand. What are our next steps? It's okay to cry. What are we going to do next?
Oh, awesome. And again, I think this article is so wonderful, and there's such a depth to it. I mean, it's not just about moms, right? But it's also, I think it's really about modeling, right? It's like what are you learning, and what are you able to teach your kids, like you said, about what's normal, what's not normal in terms of expressing emotion. I mean, because I remember oftentimes, being told, like, if stop crying, you need to cut that out. And there may even sometimes be punishment as a result of not stopping crying, right? Mm-hmm. I remember that growing up, and it's like, well, I'll try not to repeat that, because again, that conditioning, that it's like it's continuing that trauma, that legacy of trauma. You may not, your parents may not have known to call it that, but it's like now it's like, there's a lot of trauma in that.
Yeah, now we know better, and we absolutely can do better.
So just kind of continuing on the topic of parenting and the essays that you write to really, share stories about and almost kind of create that sense of community, right? The shared experience that many Black parents have. Your most recent essay, which is called "The Terrible Stress of Shopping with Kids While Black," I was like, oh yeah, this was very, very impactful to me. Now you talk about there's a checklist that you use with your sons, and so I guess we'll go back a little bit again. What was the inspiration for this essay? And again, just speaking to how the checklist. If you can talk about the checklist and why it's important, why it was important for you to do that with your sons.
Yeah, I think sort of anybody who pays attention to what's going on in this country. Saw the video, heard about it, read about it. The family in Phoenix, where the 4-year-old walked out of the store with a doll. There may or may not have been other items in question, but the fact of the matter is that they were threatened, and they, as a family, had guns pointed at them, and they were treated not like humans over this. And it just kind of goes back to, again, one of the what I call Black mom anxieties when we go into the store with our children. We all know that children are curious, they want things, they like things, and we might consider it a child being a child. Right? You teach them right from wrong when you can, but at an age like 4, you don't necessarily equate what you're doing with an act that could get you killed or held at gunpoint, right? So, sort of one of my anxieties with my son, my 15-year-old now, he loves toys, and his thing is always to go look at the toys whenever we go into a store. So this checklist, as I call it in the essay, came about because I wanted to give him the freedom to go look at toys and to go have that experience, but I wanted a way to protect him from what I knew could happen. Now, when I was a kid, I'm sure when you were a kid, maybe you recall this as well, Latasha Harlins was gunned down in a convenience store over a bottle of orange juice that she was going to pay for. We can name all the black teenagers and kids who have been shot over items, right? Mm-hmm. Over material things. And this checklist was my way of protecting my son in those anxieties, while also recognizing that it's a sad reality that we have to do this, but I do this because you're valuable to me. Our black boys are valuable to us, regardless of what, society says.
I think for me, the checklist kind of definitely rang true, but it also kind of was reminiscent of the talk. So I've done an episode mm-hmm. where we talk about the talk, and typically, my understanding of the talk and the ones I've had with my kids are with driving, right? So if the police stop you. And so this checklist kind of seemed like, okay, this is like the talk, but for younger kids.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if you thought about it in that context at all.
No, I haven't, but I think that's a great point. We're not at the point where my son is behind the wheel yet, so I haven't gotten to that quite yet. I have thought of other things for him, and his interactions with the police. But that is a very good point, and I can see that.
So I was like, oh man, I think I may have done this unconsciously, but I think you stated so well, right? So you have on your checklist, do not bring anything inside the store that the store sells, and another example is keep your hands away from your pockets at all times. I was like, yeah, I guess that's true, right? Because I know even there have been some studies that show that I don't know if it's African American boys solely or African American girls as well. Many people, non-black people, think that they look older and that they are older than they are, right? And so this idea of the childhood, black children kind of lose their innocence sooner than mm-hmm. other children because of that perception. And again, I think exactly. That sort of speaks to that, right? So, and I think, like you said, there's black mom anxiety. Again, for me, I didn't have a term for it, but I knew I had, I think it's normal, right? After talking to colleagues of mine, it's like, all right, it's normal to feel that way, unfortunately, because when mm-hmm. we talked before about some of the conditioning and the media reports, it's kind of hard not to be anxious. But I think what you do such a great job of, just like where do black mothers go to cry, there's this balance, right? You acknowledge that you have this anxiety, but you're taking actions to sort of mm-hmm. assure the safety of your child, but also nurturing your child as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what my goal is to have these conversations in a way that acknowledges these bad realities for us, but then also gives that tidbit of, we got this, though. This is what we can do. We do live in this reality. Yes, it's not awesome, but there are ways that we can navigate these realities in a way that preserves our sanity, if you will, but also helps our children feel a little bit more free in a society where they're not perceived as innocent as their white peers.
Mm-hmm. And again, I love the fact in the essay you talk about that your son, that he's valuable beyond belief, right? And I think mm-hmm. that's that affirmation of and the love that you have for your kids, right? And so some of the things that we do, we don't necessarily always. I feel sometimes it's unfair, right? That sometimes black families have to do things so differently. But I think again, there's this truth, right? That you list some of the names of kids who have died very young, mm-hmm. and like we have, as parents, we have to do what we need to do, but with love, to protect our kids, but also, like you said, to to value them, but I still at the end, I love at the end of the essay, it's not like you're holding on so tightly, right, that they can't live, which is great.
Right. Yeah, because in the end, I want them to feel free, whatever that looks like. I want them to feel free. So we do what we can as moms, but ultimately we can't, as you put it, we can't hold on so tightly that they can't go anywhere.
Correct. So Kelly, what's next for you in terms of writing projects, essays? I mean, I think I'm looking forward to your next essays. I'm learning a lot, which is great.
Thank you. My essays are always a surprise. I will tell you that.
Okay.
Those are the kinds of things that come to me. I sit down and I write them with a great sense of urgency. So I don't have the next one in my head yet, but the best way to find them is on Twitter at HelloGiggles.
Thank you for listening to this episode of What is Black Podcast. As always, you can listen to other great episodes wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're listening to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review us. We'd also love to hear from you. You can connect to us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time.